Hi everybody, this is Greg Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Greg, who's an intermediate photographer from Montana. Camera's a Canon 50D, lens is a 24-70 zoom at 48 millimeters after the conversion. Crop factor, this is effectively about an 80 millimeter shot. I want to talk more about that in a minute. Exposure trio ISO 200 f11 in 1/2 of a second. His backstory, Greg says this photo was taken at an abandoned sugar mill on the island of Kauai. He said he was trying to capture the mood of desertion, depression, and even death of an industry. He says he liked the irony of the sign on the back wall advising of the dangers of asbestos. And he says finally he worked with a friend to create a ghosted image in the background of the image. We're seeing that right here. Under questions and comments, Greg says, does the ghost add or take away from the story? What about the sepia toning? Does that add or subtract from the story of the image? And how can this image be improved? One of the first things that I wanted to talk about here is the effective focal length, about 80 millimeters. I wanted to mention that for a couple of reasons. One, it's not that traditional to see an interior space where we're getting a sense of sort of a big space having been shot with a pretty long focal length. And I wanted to talk for just a second about the idea of perspective, how we don't think about this enough. I really see this on our workshops. We're just not thinking enough about how perspective distortion can become a very powerful storytelling tool. As human beings, we experience realities by scanning them 30 to 40 times a second between our eyesight and brain function, and we quickly build very complicated three-dimensional models of spaces that just get rid of any idea of perspective distortion. This is something that each focal length is going to create. We're going to, with different focal lengths being different distances from different subjects relative to different focal lengths, we're going to create different relationships in terms of the feeling of distance in between subjects and their size relative to one another. And one of the powerful things that the longer focal length here is doing is helping to create the illusion of less of a distance from the chair to the background, which is helping to make the sign that Greg mentions being important to him in the story, and we clearly would be able to read this in a larger print. The idea of the ghost that he worked with his friend to create, some of these other fascinating subjects in the background, they have more weight shooting the shot this way as compared to getting much closer and zooming to a wider setting. The chair would loom a lot bigger and there would seemingly be a lot greater distance from the chair out to the background. I just really want to encourage you, if you have a zoom lens, to play around with this as an assignment. In the landscape or in some architectural scenario, pick a subject like the chair that is a distance away from other things that are important in the background of the shot. First get close and shoot wide, and then back up, keeping your composition about the same from left to right, and then zoom out to longer focal lengths, and then compare these shots and really start to get your mind around how you can work with perspective distortion to be a better visual storyteller. Another thing that I wanted to mention here that's a classic is this idea of having small areas of very high contrast and bright in the back of your interior shots. This can be a powerful way to leverage these high value subjects in the back of the shot to get the viewer to move all the way through the space that you're describing with your camera. Another thing that I wanted to mention here is I just love Greg's choice of subject matter. This is such a powerful subject to me. If I wanted to try to create a narrative with a still photograph, I mean, this literally could be a movie set. Having the chair in the foreground obviously gives us a strong chance to imagine ourselves being in the scene. But another thing that I want to mention here that's so powerful about this space is all of the detail. All of these details really slow my mind down. They really add to the idea of story. It's not just the details on the ground, it's all these other ideas in the background. All these things really slow me down and really start to put me inside of this space, moving around to the different concepts of the imagery, the different shapes, the different qualities of line, all the different textures. Very, very powerful scene from a detail standpoint. I love the camera position from low to high. It's really helping the chair in the space to show up as a simple image compared to the negative space that is around it. When it comes to an alternative version of the image, I want to get to Greg's question, but right away I want to crop this image and I'll talk about why. I'm going to do the crop first. I want to bring this crop from the right over to more of a square somewhere right in here. For me, when I go to the square, there are a variety of things that work better now for me as a viewer of the image. One of the things that happens is that I start to draw more attention to what I think is a very powerful area of the image. In a very graphic, powerful way, this pulls me to the back of the shot and even beyond the back wall, and I can start to imagine what is out here. In the original crop, there's a lot more literal sense of the outside. And the other thing that's happening in the space over here is that all of these ideas, to me, are extra. In other words, the same subject, the same kind of textures are in the negative space here. The outside is being suggested here in a much more powerful way. This is real high contrast. This can start to take me out of the right-hand side of the image so I'm not as contained. When I go back to the crop, I feel like this has a lot more unifying effect, and it is a lot simpler. Let's talk about some of the unifying effects. Real strong sense of a square here, and now the overall framing is more of a square. Very strong sense of a square in the chair, and that's rhyming the new framing. Very strong sense of other areas that are square in both positive space shapes and negative space shapes. Keep being suggested over and over and over again in this image. And all of those are now being rhymed by a square framing device in this new crop. The other thing that I think the square crop does is that it helps to tighten up the main ideas to more of a concentrated area of the image. And the other thing for me that works really well with the square crop is that the support for the chair is almost centered now in the composition. The chair itself is very much of a stabilizing, anchoring concept. And the square is a very stabilizing, anchoring framing device, and because it's symmetrical, it supports taking main ideas and centering them so that they are the same distance from all the sides, in the same way that all the sides are the same distance from each other in the square crops. There are a lot of reasons why I like the square crop here. The other thing that I want to talk about in the image is the idea of cropping and how that is going to let me get away with more of a feeling of cinematic lighting. I've already mentioned I feel like this is almost has the feeling or look of a movie set. In the original crop, because we can see where the light is coming from, it would be much harder to get away with sort of classic vignetting and trying to draw more attention to the main subjects by darkening around them. We see there's a big open light coming in from this direction, but when we crop, we don't have that anymore. So as far as the viewer is concerned, we could imagine that there were even lights that were left in this space that were spotlighting the main subjects. The crop is going to allow me to go to a much moodier sort of chiaroscuro cinematic lighting pattern where I go much darker and preserve the light on the ideas where I really want to draw the viewer's attention. When it comes to sepia toning, I really feel like it's too warm for my taste. To me, very warm sepia toning pushes the idea of nostalgia, sort of a warm and fuzzy. And in Greg's backstory, he's going for something that's more about desertion, depression, sort of this creepiness or edginess. And so for my taste, I would want to cut down on the warmth of the sepia. I have already a hue saturation layer here, haven't done anything, can open it up, and I'm just going to work the slider down. And as I get rid of a lot of that warm, somewhere in here where there's a little bit left is where I end up liking it. I like a little bit of warm because of me it sort of goes along with the idea of decay, but not as much as we had before. It really starts to create a mood that I think is counter to the space itself and the mood that Greg is describing, trying to set. When I get to here, the other thing that I think about is, boy, I wish that we could go back to this space right now, all of us as photographers, in twilight or in low light, and play around with creating actual dimensional lighting in this space. I keep talking about this idea of this just feeling like a set. To me, it would totally support the idea of sort of top or spotlighting concepts like the chair and these other areas that are important. And the last thing that I want to say is I love the creativity of bringing in the idea of the ghost. For my taste, I actually would like to see more of a fully formed human figure, maybe a little bit of blurring. I think if we went to more of a twilight or nighttime shot, I could see everything being really dark, maybe with the exception of the chair and a feeling of a little bit of a glowing light out here, maybe a light on the sign, and just a little bit of ambient light in some of these other areas, and having a person underlit. back in here as sort of a discovery that happens after the fact could be very powerful. One thing that's happening for me here with the ghost is that the foot being very literal and everything else being blurred, to me there's a little bit of something that's happening that's incongruent here. I also might want the value here to be less bright and to be a little bit more subtle, but I do absolutely love this concept of bringing a human figure into the space. Really fascinating image on a lot of levels. Really enjoyed spending time with Greg's image. I want to say a big thank you to him for being here. Big thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on the Mindful Eye.